Hey everybody, welcome to July 23rd's community call here at Maker. And my name is David. I'm the community development here, and I facilitate these calls weekly. We usually go through the MakerDAO universe as it's been in the last week. We talk about everything from governance to just partnerships, integrations, things that have come out on the official Maker blog. We also go through a lot of the stuff that the community's been up to. So we have a super active community at MakerDAO. And every week, it seems that people are building cool stuff, talking about cool stuff, and really moving forward on this like cutting edge thing that we're all a part of. And so yeah. So I've recently switched around the order of the call. We used to go through events first, but I think it makes a lot more sense to go through probably governance first, and then a lot of the other stuff. As MakerDAO moves forward in time, the role of governance is becoming increasing and more increasingly important. And with that, we've actually seen a lot of increase in the community's participation in governance, at least in discussions on our new form that we just launched. So, if you guys didn't know, a lot of the discussions around governance were happening on our MKR Gov for a couple of months since we resurrected that subreddit. But uh, due to just the way that Reddit is, it's not the most ideal medium for discussions that are meant to have kind of longer running tails and that want to be revisited or want to be easily found in the future. So we've actually, and we also don't have control over like what happens to those threads. You don't know what can delete data randomly on the internet, but regardless, that's like less of a problem. But we launched forum.makerdao.com. So uh, for for that, you could, it's a full-fledged forum. You have an account, you can link it to Google. It's super easy to access. There's a light reputation system in it. There's polling in it. There's everything, and it's a lot more comfortable to use. And we've seen, I think, maybe a threefold increase in the amount of people that are actually participating in discussions around governance, which has been really great to see. So I'll give you guys a bit of a breakdown of what's happening in governance. Last week we had Alex Evans come on the governance and risk call, and if you guys don't know, Alex Evans is a partner at Placeholder VC, and Placeholder has been and is super active in MakerDAO governance. So Alex Evans published the first community built MakerDAO risk model, and he went through all the math of it and explained all the underlying assumptions behind the math, and pretty much opened up his paper to community scrutiny. And so, if you're interested in that, we have a full summary of the call. It's posted on the forum, uh, and also we have video of the call and even audio on SoundCloud of the call if you're into podcasts and don't want to listen or don't want to watch. So check it out if you're into that. But risk models are really, really, really interesting. And and if I can actually just rant a second about the world, seeing the world through math, MakerDAO and the whole risk management side of it. One of the pillars of MakerDAO is scientific governance, and the reason it's called scientific governance is because we use data and we use mathematics in order to kind of shape our predictions about the future, about what might happen to various assets, and it shapes how we want to control those assets for the future. So if you set various parameters, that's going to change the outcome of things like expected default and loss given default and like all of these different uh, data points that you will expect to see in the future at some level. So it's really, really fascinating stuff. So definitely join us in those discussions. But yeah, so that was what last week's governance and risk call was mainly about. We had votes this week. So there was an executive vote on launched on Friday, the 19th, just a few days ago, and it was to raise the stability fee by 2% for a total of 22.5% a year. At the moment, it doesn't look like that poll is passing. There's less than, I think, 300 MKR in it, and over 18,000 MKR in the previous executive poll. So if you guys don't know how executive votes go, in order for one to pass, it has to surpass the previous one. So at the moment, does not look like a rate change is going to pass. And actually, yesterday, a governance poll launched to gain some soft consensus from the community about what the next executive poll should be. And the governance poll seems to be winning with a decrease of the stability fee to 18.5%. So there's, I think, what is it, 14,000 maker? I could just check. Yeah, 14,549 MKR is currently voting to lower the stability fee. And I think we saw that because with the recent increase, we saw a very, very sharp decline in the supply of Dai. It dropped from, I think, the mid 90s all the way down to 80 and something million. So, current actually lower. So, currently there's 78.8 million Dai, which is a short term low. We haven't seen the Dai supply in the 70s for a while. But, and this is a result of the heightened stability fee because Dai was drifting below the peg, and which indicated an oversupply, which is why Maker governance acted the way it did. But now it seems that the peg is back in the short term, and decisions are being made around what to do with the stability fee. So people definitely don't think it should go higher, and it seems like it'll be lowered. But we will see with the executive poll that's going to come out on Friday. So if you're a Maker holder, go out and vote. More voting means more security for the system and more robustness for the governance, and better results too. So participate. All right. So and then really quickly, I've been talking about governance for a while now. I'm gonna really quickly just highlight in our forum. There's a user Long for Wisdom. He's been absolutely killing it with a lot of the threads he's been posting. So he's posted this long running thread called Governance at a Glance. Uh, and Governance at a Glance basically just looks at what's happening in governance right now and it links you to all the relevant threads. And he organized it in a really interesting way. Let me actually just pull it up because I somehow managed to lose it. Yeah, but he he organizes it in terms of like ongoing initiatives, which uh which actually, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna share my screen for a sec so you guys could follow along with like the threads that I'm talking about, and I could explain a little bit about each one to give you guys a flavor of the kinds of discussions that are going on in governance. So governance at a glance, and by the way, here's the agenda if you want to look along. I forgot to paste it in the chat earlier. But governance at a glance, it splits things into three things. It splits things into ongoing initiatives, seeking consensus, and on the horizons. So ongoing initiatives are things that the community is trying to work through right now. So recently we had a collateral onboarding guide published by our internal risk team, and there's some meta uh, going on around that about how the community has to aggregate all this data that's required for like a proper, thorough collateral onboarding. Then there's also the systemic risk directory. So this is actually a series of polls about various scenarios and types of risk. And so if you vote, you know, vote. But it's a cool way to get some soft signaling from our community, and it's using those polls that I talked about from our forum. There's also estimating Dai USD from the ETH to Dai order book. So this is actually a part of the ongoing research into algorithmically setting the stability fee. So there's a group of people in our community that are thinking about how to create like a PID like system. If you guys don't know what PIDs are, they're found everywhere in the world, but they're just a way to create outputs from a sort of set of inputs. And so they're talking a bit about the theory of how do you give a PID a proper Dai price. Uh, so that's what that is, ongoing initiatives. And then seeking consensus is more like explicit signal requests. So a lot of it is around cadence, a lot of it is around what should be the choices in the stability fee, right? Like, should we have a 1, 2, 3, 4% raises, or should we do exponential rate stepping so that we have more, as a governance body, more flexibility in what we do with the stability fee? And so there's a lot of consensus seeking going on. And then on the horizon, things that are issues for the future that are meant to be long tail discussions. So things like we've been talking about this a lot in the last couple of months, but how do you reliably set uh, stability fee while taking into account the DSR and the risk premium of the underlying assets in all these CDPs? Um, and there's a lot of conversation around that. So yeah, there goes my rant about governance. I think it's really, really important. So if you guys are part of the Maker community, and if you don't personally find this something as a call to action for you, uh, definitely if you have friends that are, professionals that you feel would have insight into any of these topics, definitely invite them to our conversations and even invite them to our calls. We have this call and we also have our Thursday governance and risk call, which is public. Anybody can participate, anybody could talk. Uh, so yeah. All right. And I'm gonna stop there just for a second, and I'm gonna see if you guys have any questions. Feel free to like interrupt me. I know I can go a bit on a rant sometimes for like 15 minutes straight. So feel free to ask questions. Bring up things I might have missed, anything like that. All right, so moving forward, I'm going to go through just a couple of other things. We had just one partnership slash integration, and I think they did it themselves. I don't think we actually have a relationship with Dex.ag, but Dex.ag is like this really cool site that finds the best price across like a set of dexes, and so they added ETH to Dai as one of the dexes uh, that they use. So if you ever want to trade assets, you can go and figure out the best price on DexAG. Uh, and so that's it for partnerships integrations. From the Maker blog, we had a really, really cool post that I've been anticipating for a while. And actually, I have a guest for you guys here on the call today, Mr. Ed Nopel, who is part of our team here at Maker. The blog post is an introduction to auctions and keepers in multi-collateral Dai. And it launched with also a developer guide that went into some of the specifics around auctions and keepers in multi-collateral Dai, and it explained them kind of in a explain it like I'm 20 kind of level. It's pretty great documentation. Definitely read it if you're interested. So I'm gonna talk a bit about it with Ed, and we're gonna dive a little into it. Ed, if you want, introduce yourself, man. Here, I'm gonna stop for a
Hey
second.
everyone, I'm Ed Nopel. I joined Maker back in February. Most of my experience was with equities, but this is my first foray into crypto. I've done a bit of work on several of our Python APIs in the past few months, and I'm really excited to be contributing to the auctions, as well as updating PyMaker to support newer versions of the Dai stablecoin system. So, David, yeah, why don't you talk it away and provide an overview of the developer guide, and then I can talk after that a bit about the Python APIs that are involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right on. So here, let me go back to sharing my screen so you guys could follow along while I explain a bit about auctions. But auctions are different in multi-collateral Dai than single collateral Dai in that there are no auctions in single collateral Dai. So the auction mechanism is meant to be the thing that it has a few roles. It sells the collateral when a CDP gets bitten. It sells the stability fees for MKR and it takes that MKR to be burned. And then it also sells MKR for Dai in the case of under collateralization and inability to cover bad debt. So the system actually issues MKR and sells it through auctions. Currently, in single collateral Dai, there is no maker issuance to cover bad debt. There's PETH issuance to cover bad debt. That doesn't happen through an auction. That just happens through the liquidity providing contract. So currently there's a preset discount on things. So I'm kind of jumbling things up, but to just give you a one-for-one example, a CDP right now in single collateral Dai, when it gets liquidated, the collateral is taken and it's put up for sale at a 3% discount. And that incentivizes people to buy up your collateral and pay off your debt that is at risk, right? Uh, and this doesn't happen with an auction. It's pure for sale at 3%. It's just a set price. In in multi-collateral Dai, we're gonna have a collateral auction where the winning bidder pays Dai for collateral from a liquidated CDP, and the Dai is used to cover the outstanding debt. It sounds almost the same, but the only difference is that there's a bunch of really cool parameters. So maker holders can design it so that there's a minimum bid increase. They could set the duration of each auction. Uh, sorry, the bid duration and then the total auction duration. uh, there's a lot more flexibility in the auction mechanism, and there's the other advantage of the fact that the auction mechanisms don't rely on price feeds. They actually end up being their own organic price discovery mechanisms because it's basically the market setting the price by themselves. Uh, so I'm gonna really briefly talk about each one of these auctions. So there's three auctions in multi-collateral Dai. There's a surplus auction, which is you could think of the surplus auction as the maker buy and burn auction, because all it does is it takes the surplus of Dai in the system, which is typically the stability fees, and it auctions it from MKR. And so what it does with the MKR after is it sends it to the burner. Super simple. This is called actually a what is it? A flap? Well, there's in the code it's flip, flap, and flop, right? Ed, this is a flap auction, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So flap auction is basically like a forward auction where you sell collateral directly for Dai. Yeah. But except it's not collateral. It's sorry. No.
It's MKR.
It's MKR. Yeah. So right. Yeah. Selling Dai for MKR. Exactly. So, and then there's collateral auctions, which you guys will be a bit more familiar with. This is basically what happens when a CEP is underneath its liquidation ratio and it gets bitten and gets liquidated. So,
Those are also known as flip auctions.
yeah, the flip auction, exactly. And so the way a flip auction works is that it takes the full amount of collateral and puts it up for auction. And then once the Dai amount gets reached, so let's say you have $1,000 of debt and you owe a 13% penalty. So once that 1350, oh sorry, $1,300, is that right? No, 1130, yeah. $1,130 is reached. The auction actually changes. It becomes a reverse auction. So that is the flip auction, right? So in a flip auction, once that happens, the people who bid the Dai now are bidding to accept a smaller and smaller lot of collateral for that same amount of Dai. So so whatever is left over of the collateral after this completed flip auction gets returned to the CDP holder as excess collateral that wasn't needed to cover their debt plus their liquidation penalty. So that's what a collateral auction is. And then lastly, there is the debt auction. So the debt auction, it's used to basically recapitalize the system when there's bad debt, and bad debt happens when there's basically very little liquidity in the market, and there are not people willing to buy collateral at the time of like a CDP being liquidated. So let's say, for example, a CDP has Ether, it has like 10 Ether, and it gets liquidated. But Ether is crashing really fast, and on the auctions, nobody's buying. So it turns out that that the collateral auction actually never becomes a flip auction, and actually there's uh, there's bad debt in the system. There's basically not a surplus, the opposite of a surplus, right? Uh, and so what happens is that debt is used. Well, it's recapitalized by the sale of MKR. So what that auction does is it says basically here Well, I'll just read it. It's probably written better than I could say it. So, in this process, bidders compete with their willingness to accept decreasing amounts of MKR for the fixed Dai that they will have to pay. So, the system has $1,000 of bad Dai debt. It says, hey, I need 1,000 Dai. Here's X amount of MKR. And then the bidders say, okay, I'll give you 1,000 Dai for even less MKR and even less MKR. And until the auction completes and then a transaction occurs, bad debt is covered in the system. That Dai returns into the system, and MKR is issued, and the supply expands. And if
Those are also known as flop auctions, by the
flop,
way.
exactly, flip, flap, and flop. So the flip is the reverse auction, the flap is the forward auction, and the flop is the maker issuance, the debt auction. Exactly. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. It's not really too crazy to know. A lot of people used to get confused with the naming conventions of flip, flap, and flop, but I think calling them surplus auctions, collateral auctions, and debt auctions makes it a little bit easier to remember. But yeah. So Ed, how are people going to be actually interacting with these things?
Well, we actually have two APIs, and the first, any member of the community who works with our Python APIs will be familiar with PyMaker. PyMaker is really the foundation of all the Python infrastructure that we have. It includes the numeric primitives that we use for representing quantities, the rad, ray, and wad. It includes a library for interacting with the OASIS exchange. It includes facilities for interacting with the SCD contracts, and now it's offering facilities to interact with MCD. Now, the current version that's in the PyMaker, the MakerDAO repo is a bit out of date with MCD support. I do have a PR out there that I'm hoping will be merged within the next week or two. That'll bring us up to DSS 028. And within the coming weeks, we'll even update that to 0210 or whatever we happen to be on at the time. But it'll be pretty close. So anyway, just like it was with SCD, the PyMaker API is designed to be a thin wrapper around the contracts. It stays true to almost all of the terminology that you'll see in the DSS glossary. So anyone wanting to interact with, whether you want to manually create your CDPs without using a web GUI or without using a CLI tool, you can use this Python library to automate that. There is, in the README, I've added an example of just a simple workflow with MCD, just sort of creating a CDP, taking your stable coin out, repaying that stable coin, and then redeeming your collateral at the end of it. So yeah, there will be sample code in there that'll give you that complete walkthrough that you can easily test on Kovan or even your own local testnet if you prefer, just to get more familiar with it. Now, we've also added wrappers for these three auction contracts, the flip, flap, and flop. And again, if you want to relate those to the ones you see in the developer guides, you can simply check out the glossary on the DSS project in the MakerDAO repo. That'll explain each of the different auction types. There's actually a separate wiki page on there right for the auctions that talks about the life cycle of those auctions. So yeah, PyMaker will kind of remain that really thin layer around the contracts. We're also working on something called Auction Keeper. Now, obviously, in some of the scenarios that David put forth, you might be wondering, okay, well, what's the right way if I think that my MKR is worth this amount in Dai? How do I translate that to a meaningful bid? How do I participate in these auctions? The point of the Auction Keeper is to really provide a thick wrapper around that. So the whole idea behind it is any auctions that you might be interested in participating in, you can create a shell script, and that shell script could provide a fixed amount for whatever you think your MKR is worth or whatever you think the collateral types are worth, or more succinctly, really, at what price point you'd be willing to participate in the auction. For example, if you think that you'd be willing to buy ETH at a 5% discount, you just enter that price in there. You run your Auction Keeper against that price, and any collateral auctions that pop up that point to ETH, hey, they're going to bid with your best interests in mind. It also lets you specify how much gas you'd like to put on it, so you can manage your gas strategy. And yeah, that's kind of the idea behind that is on one leg to provide a thick API to allow you to participate. Now, it is a non-interactive type of participation, right? You're not going to get like a prompt on your screen saying, hey, this is what's up for bid. What would you like to do? No, it's just something that you'd be running 24/7 with your prices. And as soon as it detects there's an opportunity, for example, as soon as it detects that there's an under collateralized CDP, as soon as it detects that one of those CDPs dips below its liquidation ratio, it's actually going to kick off the auction itself. So it really becomes a contest of all these participants that are running the keepers. They're going to be the ones kicking off the auctions, right? There's nothing built into the system that'll do that. It's really the community that'll be engaging in that. So it'll kick off your auction, it'll send out an initial bid. And yeah, depending on who has the best gas strategy or who happens to get their kick request in first, they'll likely be the first bidder. And then the bids continue until such a point that the bids stop and either the bid timeout gets hit, or less likely scenario is that the auction times out due to no bids. So yeah, that's the fundamentals behind the auction keeper. It's designed to kind of maintain the auctions as well as let the community participate in them.
Right on. Thank you so much for that explanation. So do you see, as time goes on, uh, all of the different keepers that will be eventually participating in auctions, do you see their profit kind of spread decreasing over time because of like a higher efficiency in their code and a higher efficiency in like their processes and all of that? Do you think that there's going to be some sort of like natural equilibrium or like natural like uh, margin that this kind of activity will produce, since it's so technically passive? Like once you build it, you could just set it and let go.
Well, yeah, I think that the end goal into the auction keeper is to be exactly that. Let's give the people the freedom to specify what prices they'd be willing to participate in, and essentially who's ever willing to get closest to market value on what either the collaterals or the MKR is worth, they're probably going to be the ones winning the auction. Now, governance has a bit of role in this, right? When you were describing earlier on all the different risk parameters, maybe not so much risk parameters, but the auction parameters. There's one of them is the concept of the minimum bid increment.
Right.
And I think the documentation places that at 3% right now.
Yes.
The last version of DSS that I saw had it at 5, but whatever that percentage is, it's settable by governance. So who
Right.
knows what it'll be by the time this is in production. But yeah, between each bid, you have to step up your bid by that percentage. Otherwise, your request to bid will be rejected. The transaction will fail. So yeah, basically you're going to make a commitment to say, okay, well, I'm willing to bid at this 3%, and hopefully that's profitable until this bid ends and I win, right?
Right.
If
And you
the
can't
bid
cancel
duration,
a bid, right? You can't cancel a bid.
yes, the bids are immutable. So if you bid very close to the market value, right, and that's a 3-hour bid, and in that 3 hours, the market value of the collateral tanks, well, you're in a bad position, and you might
Right.
wind up winning the auction at a loss. So it's important to be careful in what you're bidding. You want to be aggressive enough to actually win, but also you have to mind the volatility, if you will.
Right, absolutely. Do you think something that would help with that, that MakerDAO governance can do, is basically set the duration of the auction uh, to be shorter? What are like the downsides of that kind of strategy? Just maybe like just off the top of my head, I can imagine that it would probably be like gas costs. It would probably increase gas costs for keepers. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think about that?
So I think that shorter durations than the defaults that are in place right now would probably foster a bit more liquidity
Hmm.
in the auctions. But again, I think it's going to be up to governance to figure out where to take those,
Right.
especially after we start running them in production, we start having these liquidations.
And
So
ultimately,
yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And I think smaller bit increments would be helpful too.
right, that actually just made me realize each one of these auctions is going to have its own set of parameters that are going to be unique to each collateral type that will eventually accept in multi-collateral Dai. So governance not only has to set all the risk parameters for the CDP, but they also have to set the auction parameters.
Only for the collateral auctions, the flip
Yeah,
auctions.
right.
For the others, they're independent of collateral type. But yes, certainly for the collateral auctions, you have to have those separate parameters because each of the collateral types has a different type of liquidity.
Exactly.
And again, we don't even really know what the collateral types are going to be until it goes up for a vote. I think there was an announcement 2 weeks ago of what the proposed collateral types were. But yeah, until those votes happen, we won't know. We're just going to be guessing.
Nice. So I have one more question for you, but it
Sure.
has nothing to do with auctions. Uh, so on changelog.makerdao.com, I noticed that oh no, I noticed that one of the more recent like in the future changes is 0.3. What's the big transition from like the 0.2 series of changes to the 0.3? Or is it just kind of doesn't mean
Um,
anything?
are you referring to the smart contracts?
Yeah, so the changelog for the updates on the multi-collateral stuff on testnet.
So I know what the smart contracts team have been working most on are governance items,
Yeah.
particularly involving the MOM and how that talks to the DS auth and the DS pause to actually interact with each of these MCD contracts so that voters can change things in them. So that hasn't really affected a lot of the auctions work that I'm doing. It's just whenever I update to a new version of DSS, I can see these changes going on.
So so let me ask you, have these auctions been tested on testnet like in our current multi-collateral Dai deployment?
I have been working on unit tests that happen in a local test net, just to kind of prove out that the contracts work the way I expect. And those local test nets, those are actually prepared, not deploying through Python, but they're deploying through DSS deploy, which is the same set of smart contracts that does the Covan deployments and will eventually do the mainnet deployment when it comes time for that. So it's a very consistent deployment with what's going to be used in production. And yes, so far it's mostly been unit tests. I'm hoping to move on to integration tests within the next week or two. And, kind of just kicking off, starting up my own CDPs, watching the auction keeper respond as I under collateralize those CDPs. The nice thing about working on a local test net, and anyone in the community that wants to play around too, you don't have to worry about oracles, right? Because you can have this deployment where your prices are stored in DS values, and when you want to change the price of the collateral, you just poke the DS value, and you can emulate this whole concept of a CDP becoming under collateralized very easily, and it makes it a lot easier to test.
Right, you have a full sandbox over the inputs, right?
Right. When we get into testing on Covan, I think some of the complexity is going to be, well, we're just going to have to keep CDPs close to that liquidation ratio and, watch what happens as they get kicked off. So the testnet gives us a lot more freedom to make sure all of this stuff is working the right way.
Right. Is there a way to use a testnet and connect like an oracle from mainnet, or basically like feed mainnet info into the testnet?
I think that there had been some chatter in a smart contracts channel regarding that. I haven't been privy to that. I haven't been looking at that myself.
I gotcha. So in the chat, there is a question from one of the people here on the call. So for someone who's busy and has no time to deploy automated keeper bots, do you believe someone like Set Protocol or similar release a tool that would make it easy for a noob?
Well, I guess I'd have to ask what the intent is. Would you be intending to have like an interactive session where, you get notified that an auction's happening and then you decide to participate yourself? Or are you looking for something a bit more automated? Because if you're looking for the automated solution, I'd like to think that Auction Keeper would be really easy to get started with. I'd like to think that we'd have a configuration out there. So at a minimum, if you want to just participate in collateral auctions alone, there'd be a shell script in there that lets you simply start up the keeper. You just modify your own model shell script with what price you want to pay for that collateral type. And hopefully within 10 or 15 minutes, you could have that thing running. Then your only responsibility becomes updating your collateral price periodically, whether you want to check the collateral price on a daily basis or whatever frequency works for you, to make sure that you're not participating at an unprofitable price. If you want to interact manually with it, we don't have any plans to build out anything kind of like as a thick client. I think your best option if you want to stay in the Python ecosystem would be to build your own tool on top of PyMaker that would allow you to do that. There is a CLI tool called MCD CLI, which works with a bunch of bash scripts that interact with Ceph. I'm not sure how much interactivity is planned between that tool and the auctions. Right now, I know it'll kind of just give you a list of all the open auctions. It doesn't have any facilities to let you bid yet, but that might be something that even the community can build on top of if we want to add that functionality.
Nice. Yeah, I always imagined that people that are going to be participating in auctions in MakerDAO for the foreseeable future, they're going to get like better and better over time. Their bots are going to get better and better. Their latency is going to get lower and lower, and eventually, like I imagine that activities like keeping. I guess like I was reading a bit about generalized mining a few months ago, and like they like generalized mining is a terrible term because it involves things that aren't mining, right? It's just activities you could do on a blockchain that earn you like pure alpha, right? Like just passive yield. And if you can create an automated keeper and keep improving it to just give you this yield, you can imagine that there's going to be like uh, a lot of people doing this, or at least a lot of people trying, and so that's something that kind of gives me hope that hopefully we'll see very very few events where there's low liquidity in auctions. Uh, but for like the average Joe, I think that getting in early is probably the best bet if you want to produce a yield. But yeah, I can't imagine why somebody like Set Protocol though would create a tool for it. Like I don't see what their incentive would be, except I don't know, maybe make it a cool app or something. Yeah, I don't know. But either way, yeah, thanks for the question, Frank. And thank you, Ed, so much for coming on the call. It's 12:40. We still have some stuff to go through the call, but if anybody else has questions for Ed about auctions, keepers, APIs, how all that kind of stuff works, Ed is in our Rocket chat. You could ask him now while he's still here. But if you have any like tailing questions, you could hit him up. His handle is I'll actually put it in the chat, but it's at ed.nopel. Uh, and simple as that.
And also, you could feel free to check out the Keeper public channel in there. That's probably the best place to ask about those. And if you're interested in finding when all this MCD stuff is going to hit the MakerDAO repo, feel free to visit both the PyMaker and Auction Keeper project pages, and you can simply bonk on that watch button, and you'll be notified as the PRs get merged in and as the changes made. I'll try to keep the README MDs up to date with all the new stuff in there. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Nice, nice. Yeah. And actually, yeah, so thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, so moving forward. Man, I think auctions and keepers are so fascinating. It's really, really, really cutting edge stuff, man. So highlights from the community. If you guys have been around this week, community development has launched the version 1 of the community development portal. And the community development portal, I'll actually share 1 second. So the community development portal, which should be on this screen right here. The community development portal lists all of the initiatives in our community, right? So there's Awesome Maker DAO. It's like the huge resource repository that we in community development and the broader community have been curating over the last year. There's community meetup grants, which, if you're not aware, If you're interested in hosting a meetup, MakerDAO, the Maker Foundation, has a pool of funds available to help with some of the expenses involved. So it's a super simple process. Check it out. There's also community translations. So this is a community-led initiative to translate various documentation around Maker into different languages. I think to date we have 7 languages and something like I think around 40 documents have been translated into other languages. So that is thriving and booming. So definitely come join us in the translations channel if you want to check it out. There's the MakerDAO FAQs, which anybody is welcome to submit pull requests for and contribute to. Uh, this is something that I've been working on a lot over the last year. And then there's kind of the more general stuff like governance. You could find everything from you know the core foundation principles, the governance framework that Stephen wrote earlier in the year, to all the summaries and transcripts of the governance and risk meetings. And then for completion, let me finish through. There's the development grants program, which Rich spearheads. Mostly, you guys could check out a bit about it there, but you can expect more stuff in the near future. Then there's also hackathons and bounties. So we participate in those, and you can find out more information about uh, as an organizer if you're hosting a bounty or hosting a hackathon and you want us to sponsor it or judge it or give you ideas for it. You could figure out how to reach out to us here. And also, if you're a hackathon participant, there's a bunch of developer resources and stuff that are found in here. So, uh, yeah. And then lastly, there's a contributing section because ultimately, this whole thing, this whole community development portal, it's all about making it easy for the community to build itself, quite literally. And so, at community development, you could literally jump in and help with whatever you feel that you can help with. So if you're great at asking questions and answering questions, throw me a PR in the FAQs. If you want to translate something to your native language, there's a bounty for that. And so the community development portal is basically meant to just bring the community together, kind of to a one-stop shop where they could figure out how they can interact with Maker. And so this is the V1. We're going to be adding pages to it. We're going to be refining it. Uh, and actually, I want to give credit. So this was not built by just Maker Foundation employees. A lot of the stuff in here was actually contributed, right? So I think the portal itself, purely like working on the information architecture and like everything, the whole setup, we had I think 6 community members and 3 foundation employees work on that together. So, uh, 2-for-1 split on community members to foundation employees to make this happen. So thank you to the community, really. And besides that, we want to make it better. So we invite you to give us feedback. You can give us feedback on the product feedback channel in Rocket Chat or in our brand new forum. Uh, and so, uh, and so that actually brings me to one more thing. So we've been posting these help wanted threads in the forum, just kind of something that we at the foundation have been looking for. And I will again really quickly share my screen so you guys could see what I'm talking about. But we want currently 3 things. So we've been looking for somebody in the community to produce a governance dashboard. This is definitely something that can be used for hackathons, right? A way to look at governance in MakerDAO, all the stats, everything. We would love to see something like that. We also are hoping for a DocuSource setup to replace the existing portal. So the community development portal I just showed you lives on Gitbooks, and there's several issues around linking relative links and like connecting all of the stuff that lives on GitHub to Gitbooks, and it's just a little bit wonky. It's just not exactly as flexible as we were hoping. And so it's come to our attention that DocuSource might be a better setup. So if somebody's interested in helping us think through that, hit up Rich Brown or me, and let's talk about it. And lastly, we also are looking for the community to help us with the styling of the forum and the community development portal. So at the moment, uh, they're both super dry and white and like surgical. Maybe not surgical, but they're they're I don't want to say lacking, but they can be improved, right? So if anybody from the community is into any of these three things, if they think that they could add some value or contribute, reach out to me. There's bounties available, and ultimately we're hoping to build a better MakerDAO ecosystem for our community. So yeah. All right. That's it for the big community thing. But there's a bunch of other stuff that happened in the community this week. So if you guys have been following along with Compound, there's been a huge surge of Dai demand in Compound over the last week, and so much so that they actually implemented a new interest rate model. So if you guys don't know about Compound, it's a money market where you could borrow and lend different assets. One of which among them is Dai, and Dai currently, it used to have a band between 5% minimum borrowing rate to 20% maximum borrowing rate, or sorry, to 17% maximum borrowing rate. And they updated the band to be the upper bound to be from 17 to 20%. So borrowing may cost more, and suppliers actually get compensated more. So yeah, Compound increased their rates for Dai, which definitely helped with people refinancing. So I don't know if you guys know about what happened a few weeks ago, but InstaDApp created a Maker to Compound bridge. So if you had a CDP that you were paying 20.5% a year on, and the current borrow rate of Dai on Compound was like 16%, and you wanted to transfer your debt so you could save a little bit of money, InstaDApp made that super, super freaking easy. And so much so that uh, so I have in front of me, and I'm going to share my screen again. I have a chart, and the chart is basically how much Dai transferred from MakerDAO to the Compound protocol, and the chart is like early from early June, even before June, all the way to now, and you can actually see uh, there was a bit of a spike in early June, probably one big holder, right? But then once the bridge launched, we saw all this huge activity, and then actually a bunch of bigger holders came in. So we saw like an excess of like three or like maybe like 5 or 6 million Dai flow between Compound and Maker, and I think this is actually from Maker to Compound. It might be both ways, but I'll find out outside of the call. But either way, I just thought this was a really cool graphic to check out because it just shows that the space is becoming more and more efficient. So with that bridge, stability fee changes are actually uh, uh, more effective, right? So really, really cool to see things like this develop in the space. So yeah. Developer creations, yeah, that's what I just showed. The chart of Dai, the flow between Compound and Maker. That's the only thing that I've really seen developed this week. Uh, Not really too big of a development. It's just a graph, but nevertheless, it's a cool graph. There was a few interesting articles. There was this thing called The Week in Dai, which was published by Blockonomy. It's a Maker interest rate hike, fat loans, and a DeFi bridge. Just covered basically the stuff that I just talked about. There was another article by the guys at Masendo called Proof of Brunch, showcasing Masendo's proof of concept with burritos and mimosas. So if you guys don't know about Masendo, they're a wallet that implements Connects. So there's like a layer 2 solution, and you could actually transfer ERC20 tokens without worrying about ETH. So it's pretty cool, and it's really super freaking fast because it's on Connects. I think transaction time is like less than 5 seconds or something. So you actually don't have to wait like 5 to 10 minutes for your Ethereum transaction to clear. Your transaction will clear a lot quicker on the UI, and it's just overall a cooler experience. We actually hosted a event with them for New York Blockchain Week a month or two ago, and it was really, really cool using their wallet. So check out their article. They're working on improvements, but nevertheless, moving forward. And the last article that I mentioned is Dai enables world's first legally compliant peer-to-peer insurance architecture, and I thought this was interesting just as a think piece. But the guy, I think his name is Joshua Davis. He talks a bit about this project called TandaPay, but the overarching idea is the fact that peer-to-peer insurance can be actually like a thing. So the way that insurance currently works is, a centralized company kind of pulls together funds and they account for the risk of certain events happening, right? So like for car insurance, there's just a bunch of people, right? And all these people are different ages, different skin colors, different health conditions, different like a million different variables that these insurance companies try to watch, and they try to predict. Basically, it's all prediction, and they try to make it so that the pool can cover all of the losses. And so, what happens when the insurance is automated? You know, does that mean that anybody can just put their money in a pool and potentially earn interest and potentially, like it's a really really cool concept for how insurance might evolve in the future. So, article worth reading. And then lastly, we have a handful of great threads that I highlighted, and these threads I highlight just based on like the comment activity and the idea. So one of them is, could MakerDAO implement an algorithmically set stability fee similar to compounds right now? And that's a great question, and there are good answers for why we cannot do that right now, and why it's probably best that we don't for a while. Uh, but I'll leave that to you to go read the thread and share your thoughts. And then another thread was, congratulations, folks. Maker tokens have believably reached fair present value. And I don't agree or disagree with this person. I think it's a great thread because the guy has a valuation model, and I know a bunch of people have shared MKR valuation models over the last couple of years in the Maker community. So another one surfaced, another one worth looking at. And lastly was the KYC and Maker auctions. This was a thread talking about basically like the relationship between Maker auctions and KYC. And Rune commented on it, and he basically wrote that if the CDP itself is KYC'd and custodied by a trusted institution, a regulated financial entity could bid on the liquidation auction and stay in full compliance with AML and KYC laws. So he just kind of explained like uh, why a certain obstacle isn't actually an obstacle uh, in terms of regulated entities participating in auctions in the future on collateral. So yeah, those were the handful of cool threads this week. And then lastly, we're gonna breeze through events. I've been talking about the two big events every week that we're gonna be doing in the next few months. So Berlin Blockchain Week is coming up in about a month. Stay tuned for more. There's a bunch of cool events happening like Web3 Summit, DAppCon, and ETH Berlin, and even a Dai Dappy Hour. If you're out there, look out for an invitation to that. And then we have in Japan in October, we have Osaka. A bunch of people from Maker are going to be there. That's going to be really, really, really fun. DevCon 5. Uh, and that's it for the big events. And then for this week, there's only 3 that I saw. We're going to be in Tokyo for a fintech meetup. I believe Jocelyn is going to be there. If I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken. It might be Chow actually, or Do. I don't know. Uh, but one of them is going to be there. And then in the U.S., we have on the 25th. Oh, that Tokyo fintech meetup is actually happening today. So if you want more info on it, I don't know if it already happened, but there's a meetup link in the agenda doc that I shared. So check it out. And then so the other 2 events are both happening on the 25th. One is the Nexus Global Summit 2019. Our head of BD, Greg DePrisco, is going to be there. I think he has a talk there. Not 100% sure. And then in Vietnam on the 25th, we have Jocelyn participating in the Coin Time Summit. So yeah, that's about it for this week at MakerDAO for the community call too. I see it's like 3 minutes to the hour, so I think we made really really great time. Uh, and I think we covered a lot of really interesting stuff. So thank you, Ed, so much for being on the call, man.
You're welcome.
Total pleasure talking with you about auctions and keepers. And thank you guys for joining the call. I really enjoy when people are here, when people ask questions. I just want you guys to know that I am the host. I am just facilitating. This call belongs to you guys, and I'm happy to change it with feedback. I'm happy to hear suggestions for guests, suggestions for topics you want covered. And generally speaking, the world is yours. Thank you guys for coming, and I hope to see you guys again next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, guys.